The sky above the moon was broken. Shards of a burning frigate streaked across the atmosphere like dying stars, trailing smoke and fire through the violet haze. Beneath that sky, Alira Voss crawled from the wreckage of her escape pod, her pale hands shaking as they pressed against the dust-choked ground. Her armor was cracked, her breathing mask sparked. Blood, deep blue and gleaming, oozed down her brow, mixing with the ash that coated everything on this forgotten rock. She didn't know the name of the moon. She didn't care. She only knew she was still alive. And being alive meant someone would still be hunting her. A low growl echoed in the distance. Not mechanical, not sentient, something primal. She staggered to her feet, clutching the small plasma blade still clipped to her belt. Her vision blurred. She blinked, trying to clear it, but the damage to her mask distorted the light. Everything shimmered, the rocks, the hills, the shape standing at the ridge above. A shape that didn't shimmer. Tall, towering, unmoving. She squinted through cracked lenses. The figure stepped forward, slow and heavy, cloaked in ragged cloth and metal armor that looked older than the stars. The face beneath the hood was unmistakable. Broad jaw, deep-set eyes like twin coals, purple skin, scarred and hard as stone. "Thanos," she whispered, her voice caught between awe and fear. He didn't speak. He only looked at her. And then, without a word, he turned and walked away. Alira's knees buckled. She dropped, coughing into her mask. Her vision darkened. She didn't want to pass out here. Not after all this. Not on a moon where beasts waited in the dark and nightmares came wearing purple skin. But she didn't have a choice. The last thing she saw before the blackness took her was the shadow of Thanos returning and lifting her from the dirt like she weighed nothing at all. She woke on stone. Cool air hummed through a cavern carved into the mountain's heart. A fire crackled nearby, its heat gentle but real. She lay on a pile of salvaged fabrics, ripped cargo sails, and shredded thermal blankets. Her wounds were bandaged. Her armor was gone. Her blade, however, rested beside her, untouched. He was there, sitting silently by the fire, sharpening a blade that looked like it had seen 1,000 wars. "You could have left me," she said hoarsely. Thanos didn't look up. "I still could." Alira laughed, but it came out more like a cough. Generous. A long silence followed. The fire popped. Then finally, she asked the question that had been clawing at her since she saw him. "Why are you here? You're supposed to be dead." Thanos stopped sharpening. He looked into the fire like it held the answer. "I chose exile, not death." "You regret it?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "No, the galaxy regrets me." Alira pulled the blanket tighter around her. The cold was returning, not from outside, but from the weight of what she knew. "They'll come for me," she warned. "They'll find this place. You should send me away." Thanos met her eyes for the first time. There was no pity in his gaze, only certainty. "I gave you shelter," he said simply, "and I don't take that back." Alira stared at him, unsure if she should feel safer or more afraid. The fire crackled, casting long shadows across the cavern walls. Alira sat near it, wrapped in a patchwork of blankets, the warmth from the flames only just reaching her. Her body still ached from the crash, her bones bruised, but the biggest wound was inside. The confusion, the unease, gnawed at her. Thanos sat on the opposite side of the fire, motionless. His broad shoulders were silhouetted against the light, his face unreadable, the sharp angles of his jaw and high brow hard as ever. He hadn't spoken since she'd woken, and she hadn't been sure whether to thank him or ask him why he hadn't let her die. "You're staring," Thanos said suddenly, his voice low and almost amused. Alira blinked, realizing she had been watching him without meaning to. "I wasn't," she lied, looking away. Thanos' lips twitched, almost imperceptibly. "Sure." He returned to his work, sharpening the blade he'd been tending to before. The rhythmic rasp of metal against stone filled the silence. Alira's thoughts drifted, spinning in the quiet between them. What did he want from her? Why had he saved her? He had no reason to. No one did. She cleared her throat, breaking the stillness. "You don't have to keep me here," she said. "I can leave once I'm able to walk again. I'm not your responsibility." Thanos didn't stop working. I don't take responsibility. I offer shelter. She frowned, confusion flickering across her face. What's the difference? He looked up then, meeting her eyes. His gaze was as steady as the stone walls surrounding them. I don't owe you anything, but I don't leave people to die. Like you? She asked, her voice cutting through the heavy air. You don't think you deserve to die? He didn't react, though his hand paused on the blade for just a moment. I'm not dead, yet. There was something about his words, so blunt, so heavy, that made her breath catch. She had heard stories of THANOS, of his brutality, his warlord ways. But this felt different. He wasn't the monster they painted him to be. THANOS returned to the sharpening, the quiet rasping sound almost soothing. I owe you a debt, Alira said softly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. For saving me, for bringing me here, she hesitated. I don't know how to repay that. THANOS lifted an eyebrow, his voice a low rumble. There's nothing to repay. I didn't save you for anything. Alira shifted uncomfortably, feeling the weight of this silence. Was this really how he thought? No strings attached, no price for his actions. She swallowed. Then, what is this? Why do you help? THANOS glanced at her, his gaze sharp. I help because it's what I do, and because you don't deserve to die alone on a dying moon. The simplicity of his answer made something shift inside her. There was no hidden agenda, no expectations. It was just his choice, and she didn't know how to respond to that. She stared into the fire, thoughts racing. She was human. She was nothing special, but in his eyes, maybe she was something worth saving. Why are you here? She asked, her voice quiet now, softer. I thought you wanted to be forgotten. He chuckled, a sound that was more a deep rumble than amusement. I'm not forgotten. I'm exiled. She turned her head to look at him, a frown tugging at her lips. Exiled? By whom? THANOS paused. His hands stopped moving. His eyes didn't leave the fire. By my own. The universe is too small for the likes of me. Alira's heart sank. He had been alone for so long, exiled to this barren moon. But even in his solitude, he still found the space to help. She realized then that her debt wasn't just to him. It was to the idea of kindness, of saving someone when no one else would, and it felt like a weight she wasn't sure she could carry. As the fire flickered, she spoke again, her voice steadier. You've given me shelter. I'll keep my promise. THANOS looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly. Promise. Shelter earns warmth, she said with a sleek smile, even as the firelight danced across her face. And I don't break promises. For the first time, THANOS' lips twitched into a faint, almost amused smirk. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The distant hum of engines rattled the ground beneath them. Alira's breath quickened as she crouched behind a jagged outcrop, her pulse pounding in her ears. THANOS stood a few feet away, his massive frame a silhouette against the horizon. He was calm, his eyes scanning the sky, a predator waiting for his prey to reveal itself. Do you hear that? She whispered, her voice tense. He didn't turn. Yes. The hum grew louder, closer now. A ripple of static filled the air, vibrating through the stones of the moon. Alira's fingers tightened around the hilt of her plasma blade, her heart racing in her chest. It's them, she muttered. The bounty hunters. THANOS didn't seem fazed. He merely lifted his chin, his eyes narrowing as the shadowy outlines of ships descended from the clouds above. There were 3 of them, sleek, menacing, and armed to the teeth. Their engines roared as they made their approach, their weapons locked and loaded. Stay low, Alira hissed, reaching for the small communicator strapped to her belt. I'll try to send a signal. Maybe I can. No, THANOS interrupted, his voice cutting through the air like the crack of a whip. They're here for you, not me. Don't waste your time. Her heart sank. He was right. They were here for her. The bounty on her head had grown since her escape, a price large enough to make even the deadliest hunters salivate. She had hoped to outrun them, to disappear in the far reaches of space. But there was no hiding now. The ships touched down in a cloud of dust, their engines whirring to a slow stop. The hatch doors opened, and the hunters emerged. They were a mix of humanoid and alien species, rough, scarred, and every bit as dangerous as their reputation. One of them, A tall, red-skinned Kree with a jagged scar across his face spotted Illyra first. His eyes locked onto her, and a grin spread across his lips. "There she is," he said, his voice gravelly with disdain. "The fugitive princess." Illyra swallowed hard, but THANOS was already stepping forward. She moved to stop him, but he raised a hand, stilling her. "Stay behind me," he ordered. His voice was low, but it carried with the weight of command. And when THANOS stepped into the open, the hunters froze. The Kree's grin faltered, his eyes widening as he recognized the hulking figure approaching him. "Thanos," the Kree's voice trailed off, disbelief lacing his tone. Thanos' cold gaze swept over them, calculating, almost bored. "You have one chance to leave." The hunters exchanged uncertain glances, clearly shaken by the sight of the infamous warlord standing before them. But it was a fleeting hesitation. The Kree recovered quickly, his hand moving to the blaster at his hip. "Do you think we're afraid of you, Thanos?" The Kree sneered. "You're nothing but a shadow now. You're not the monster you used to be." Thanos didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head, his voice dropping to a menacing calm. "It's not fear you should worry about." Before the Kree could react, Thanos moved in a blur of motion. He was a storm unleashed. His fist crashed into the Kree's chest with a sickening thud, sending the bounty hunter sprawling backward, gasping for air. Thanos wasn't done. He moved with precision, knocking another hunter to the ground with a devastating strike, his massive hand swinging with brutal force. The remaining two hunters hesitated for a heartbeat before firing, their blasts lighting up the darkening sky. But Thanos was already moving again, dodging with ease, his own weapon drawn in an instant. A single shot, a single precise shot that took out the blaster of one of the hunters, the blast ricocheting off the rocks and sending him sprawling to the ground. Illyra stood frozen in awe, watching the chaos unfold. Thanos didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. He moved like a force of nature, unstoppable and unforgiving. Within moments, the hunters were on the ground, disarmed or unconscious. Thanos looked down at them, his chest rising and falling with the ease of someone who had just gone for a walk. "You were warned," he said flatly. Illyra's breath caught in her throat. You didn't have to do that." He turned to face her, his eyes cold and unreadable. "Yes, I did." She stared at him, her heart racing. Thanos had just shown her something terrifyingly powerful and deeply unsettling. He had saved her, yes, but at what cost? The galaxy would know soon enough that Thanos still lived. And she was the reason. The weight of that knowledge sank in, but she wasn't sure whether she was terrified or grateful. The soft hum of the shuttle's engines was a constant undercurrent, a sound Illyra had long since tuned out. She stared out of the small viewport, watching the stars streak past as the ship made its way through the black void of space. There was a bitter cold to the silence between her and Thanos, and it felt thicker than the vacuum of space itself. He sat across from her, as silent and unyielding as ever. His broad frame seemed to fill the small cabin, his gaze never wavering from the star map projected before him. He was a creature of force, every muscle, every movement, a reminder of his strength. But today, he felt distant, different. There was something in the way he stared at the stars, like he was searching for something in their infinite darkness. "Are you sure about this?" Illyra finally asked, her voice breaking the stillness. Thanos turned his head slowly, meeting her gaze. His eyes, always cold, were now unreadable, hiding whatever thoughts were running through his mind. "I don't need to be sure," he said, his voice a low growl. "This is the only option." Her stomach twisted at the words. The meeting with her royal house, the one she had worked so hard to avoid, was inevitable now. The council would demand answers. They would expect her to return, not just as their soldier, but as their princess. And the cost of peace would be her marriage to Thanos. It wasn't just a political move. It was a sacrifice, one she hadn't been prepared to make. The bed was the price. The bed. She had joked about it when they first met. Now, it was the anchor of her fate. "What do you expect to gain from this?" Illyra asked, her tone sharp. "You don't want their crown. You don't want anything from them." Thanos' lips twitched slightly. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was something. A crack in the wall he had built. "You misunderstand me, princess. I don't want their throne. I want what's rightfully mine. Alira frowned. And what's that? Peace, he said simply, and control over my own destiny. She let the words hang in the air, unsure how to respond. Was he truly so lost in his own quest for redemption, or was this part of some bigger plan? The lines were beginning to blur, and she was no longer sure where he ended and she began. The shuttle dropped out of faster-than-light travel with a jolt, and the stars outside flickered back into focus. The royal palace loomed before them, a gleaming spire of silver and gold, stretching high into the clouds of the gas giant it orbited. The place that had once been her home, where expectations were smothering, where duty choked every breath. She couldn't go back. Not like this. Not with THANOS. Do you know what it's like? Alira asked quietly, almost to herself. To be told who you are, who you should be, from the moment you're born. THANOS regarded her with that unreadable gaze, his hands resting calmly on his lap. For a moment, there was no violence in him, just a man. A man who had seen too much, lived too long, and found solace in a quiet life that seemed just out of reach. No, he said after a long pause. I've never known what that feels like. Her heart skipped. That quiet honesty hit her harder than any battle. In that moment, she realized something. THANOS, the warlord, the monster of the galaxy, had never known what it was to be caged by expectation, to be trapped in a role that wasn't yours. Maybe that was why he fought so fiercely. Maybe that was why he seemed so determined to destroy everything in his path. She turned to face him fully, feeling the weight of her next words. I don't want this. I don't want a marriage that's based on the debt. I don't want to be used as a pawn to end your exile. THANOS didn't react. He simply met her eyes, his gaze steady, as if he had expected her to say that. You're more than a pawn, Alira. You're a princess, and it's time you started acting like one, he said, his voice quiet but firm. The words settled between them, heavy and final. Alira exhaled slowly, her mind swirling with the conflict of duty and desire. It was the first time she had heard him speak of her with respect, and it was unsettling. Tonight, I will give you shelter, THANOS said, standing and moving toward the small cot in the corner. Tomorrow, we face your people together. Alira blinked, surprised by the abruptness. What are you? I don't take kindness lightly, he said, his voice low and steady. This will be our last night as strangers. He laid down on the cot, turning his back to her. She stared at his broad form, a man who had fought and conquered worlds, now offering her something far more vulnerable, his trust. Alira stared at the ceiling, wondering if she had just stepped into a new chapter of her life, or if she was about to lose herself entirely. The royal palace was a labyrinth of glass and steel, a monument to the power that had once been. Now it felt more like a prison. Alira could feel the weight of history pressing down on her as she walked through the grand halls. The towering walls were lined with portraits of ancestors, their cold, painted eyes watching her every move. The air was thick with the scent of perfume and polished marble, familiar before and now. Behind her, THANOS moved like a shadow, his imposing presence undeniable even in the opulence of this place. His eyes were fixed ahead, his jaw set, and there was no trace of hesitation in his steps. It was as if the grandeur of the palace didn't matter to him, as if he were already a part of something far bigger than this, something more dangerous. Alira glanced over her shoulder at him. He was still the same, unyielding, like a storm that never stopped. The only thing that had changed was the strange sense of partnership that had developed between them. He wasn't just her protector now. He was her equal in a way she never thought possible. The throne room loomed ahead, its massive doors carved with ancient symbols of power and dominance. Alira's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't ready for this, not for what was coming, not for the confrontation that was about to unfold. Are you ready? THANOS' voice cut through her thoughts, low and steady. She looked at him, meeting his gaze for the first time since they had boarded the shuttle. His eyes were unreadable, but there was something in the way he stood, something that told her he wasn't afraid. I have to be, she whispered. He nodded once, the motion almost imperceptible. Then let's go. The doors to the throne room opened with a heavy groan, and Alira stepped inside. The room was as grand as she remembered, with its high ceilings, gold-trimmed pillars, and the grand throne at the far end. But it was the faces that struck her most, those of her royal family, seated in their high-backed chairs, watching her with expressions ranging from cold curiosity to barely contained contempt. At the center of them all, her father sat, his posture regal and stiff. His eyes, once filled with warmth, were now hard, unyielding. He looked at her like a stranger, as if the daughter who had once lived in his shadow no longer existed. "Alira," he said, his voice cold but commanding, "you return, not as a daughter, but as a disgrace." The words stung, but Alira refused to let them show. Instead, she straightened her back and met his gaze. "I return, father, not to beg for your forgiveness," she said, her voice steady, "but to do what I must." Thanos stepped forward, his massive frame dwarfing the council members around him. They all stiffened, their eyes widening with a mix of disbelief and fear. "You have no power here, Thanos," one of the council members spat, his voice sharp with venom. Thanos didn't flinch. "I have all the power here, because she does, and she will not be silenced." The words echoed in the room, and for a moment there was silence. Alira could feel the weight of it pressing down on her, her father's disappointment, the council's judgment, the gravity of the moment. The future was teetering on the edge, and she was the one who had to decide if she would fall or rise. She turned to face the council, her voice rising with newfound strength. "I've been exiled. I've fought for my life. And now I fight for my future. This man," she gestured to Thanos, who stood at her side, unshaken, "will be the one to see that I am not cast aside. This is my choice, and you will respect it." There was a flicker of tension in the room, the council members shifting in their seats, muttering among themselves. Her father's gaze remained steady, but his lips tightened in a thin line. "You think you can return here, after everything you've done?" he asked, his voice low, almost mournful. "After all the bloodshed?" Alira swallowed hard, but she stood firm. "You have forgotten what it means to rule, to lead. It's not just about blood and crowns. It's about choosing who you stand with. And I choose him." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Thanos didn't move. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to demand their attention. Finally, her father spoke, his voice strained. "This is not how it's meant to be, Alira. You were born for more." "I was born for more than this," she said, her voice steady, eyes locked with his. "I won't be your pawn anymore." Thanos' hand brushed against hers, a silent promise of what was to come. The pact was sealed. The palace was alive with whispers. The halls buzzed with a quiet tension, every corner of the royal chambers feeling like a pressure cooker waiting to explode. Alira's footsteps echoed in the silence as she walked beside Thanos, her mind still reeling from the confrontation in the throne room. Her father's cold words still clung to her thoughts. The council's distrust was palpable in the air. Nothing was certain now, not her place in this court, and certainly not her future. But in that moment, walking beside Thanos, she felt a strange sense of resolve. He was still a monster in the eyes of many, a warlord, a destroyer, but here with her, he was something else, a force that had defied the galaxy, that had stood against empires and worlds, and yet still walked beside her as if she were an equal. Not because of her bloodline or the crown she was supposed to wear, but because of something far deeper, something they shared now. She glanced up at him. His face remained stoic, as it always did, his eyes scanning the corridors with a sharpness that made the air around him seem to tighten. He was unbothered, as if the entire universe was beneath him. But Alira knew better. He was waiting, watching, always calculating, always anticipating. "You didn't have to do that back there," she said, her voice low, unsure of the words. She had seen Thanos confront entire armies without breaking a sweat. But this was different. This was her family, the people who had raised her, the people who were still trying to drag her back to a life she had run from. "I did," he replied simply, his voice deep and unwavering. "You needed to see that you don't have to walk alone." His words hit her like a wave, the weight of them sinking in as she tried to process everything they meant. She wasn't just a pawn. She wasn't just a princess to be married off. She was her own force now, a force Thanos had already begun to shape. Whether she liked it or not, the choices she made would have consequences, consequences that no one, not even her father, could escape. The sound of footsteps broke her thoughts. A small procession of guards approached, their faces rigid, eyes fixed straight ahead. They made no move to acknowledge her or THANOS, but their presence alone was enough to remind her of the power in this place. The weight of tradition, of legacy, was suffocating. And yet, here she was, no longer just a member of the royal family, but a woman who had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. The guards parted as she and THANOS continued toward the inner chambers, their steps swift and purposeful. The closer they got to her father's personal quarters, the heavier the air became. Elira's heart pounded. This wasn't just a diplomatic meeting, it was a reckoning. THANOS stopped just outside the doors, his posture unwavering. Whatever happens inside, you don't need to pretend. You're not their princess anymore, not unless you choose to be. Her breath caught in her throat. He was giving her the choice, and for the first time she felt the full weight of that power. The crown, the title, none of it mattered. She wasn't bound to them. She never had been. She looked up at him, feeling the pull of something deeper, something beyond politics, something human. "I'm not going back," she said, her voice steady now. "Not the way they want me to." THANOS nodded, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that mirrored the resolve she had just found in herself. It was a promise, a bond between them that no one else could break. He turned to face the guards who stood just outside, nodding slightly. "We're not here to beg for their approval. We're here to change the game." The doors to the inner chambers swung open. The light from within flooded the hallway, casting long shadows over them both. It was time. Time to confront her past, to face her father, and to decide once and for all what her future would be. As Elira stepped inside, she felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her like never before. But with THANOS by her side, she knew she wasn't stepping into that storm alone. This time she was ready to fight. The throne room was a place of power, but today it felt like a stage for an impending war. Elira stood at the center of the vast hall, her eyes locked on the figure seated at the throne, the man who had once been her father. Behind him, the council members waited, their faces masks of indifference, their gazes heavy with judgment. The room was filled with tension so thick, it seemed to hum in the air. THANOS stood by her side, his presence a towering reminder of the storm that had come to this kingdom. The warlord, the conqueror, the exile, none of those titles mattered now. Not here, not today. "You've returned," her father's voice rang out, cold and harsh. With him, the monster. Elira didn't flinch. Her back was straight, her heart beating steadily in her chest. She had no need to defend THANOS. The truth was already there, plain for all to see. The man beside her was a force that couldn't be ignored. He wasn't just a warlord, he was her ally, her protector. And together, they had the power to rewrite the rules. "I've returned because this is where I belong," Elira said, her voice steady, unyielding. "And I will not go back to a life of chains." Her father's eyes narrowed, his expression twisted with anger. "You're a traitor. You abandoned your bloodline for him, for this killer." THANOS didn't respond, but the way he stood, still as a mountain, unmoving, spoke volumes. He wasn't here for words. He wasn't here to justify his existence. The galaxy had already written that story. Today, it was about Elira, her choice, her future. "I've never been part of your bloodline," Elira said, her words sharp and cutting through the tension like a blade. "Not the way you wanted me to be. You always wanted me to fit into a mold, to follow a path I didn't choose. You didn't see me. Not really, but he does." Her father's gaze flicked to THANOS, his lips curling in disdain. "You think I don't see what this is? This is nothing but a desperate play for power. You think he'll protect you forever? He'll use you like a pawn. All of you are the same." THANOS' voice broke the silence, low and menacing. "I don't use anyone. Not her. Never her." There was a deadly calm in his tone, one that made the room fall even quieter. The council members shifted uncomfortably, their gazes flicking nervously between the two of them. THANOS had never needed to raise his voice to command respect. His mere presence was enough. "You've already lost, father," Elira continued, her voice steady despite the fire that burned inside her. You may have the crown, but you've lost the heart of your kingdom. Your people are tired of being led by fear. They're ready for something different." Her father's face twisted in fury, but before he could speak, one of the council members, an old ally of her father's, stood up and spoke in a voice laced with disdain. "You don't know what you're talking about, Illyra. This kingdom is built on blood and tradition. You can't just throw that away." Illyra turned her gaze toward him, her eyes unblinking. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm not throwing it away. I'm choosing something else." For a long moment, there was silence in the throne room. The tension hung in the air like a blade ready to fall. Then, without warning, THANOS stepped forward, his massive form looming over the council. "Enough talk." The ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble as his words echoed through the hall. The council members shifted back, their fear palpable. Illyra didn't need to look at him to know he was ready for whatever came next. He would stand by her. Always. Her father, though still seated, straightened slightly, his fists clenched around the arms of the throne. "You're making a mistake, Illyra. This will cost you." "No," she said, shaking her head. "What would cost me is walking away now. The cost is not choosing to stand up." Her voice rang out, strong and unyielding. "And I stand with him. I stand with my choice. I will not be your puppet anymore." The room went deathly quiet, the eyes of the council members fixed on her. Her father's lips trembled in anger, but there was no denying the weight of her words. The crown he had once held so tightly was slipping from his grasp, and for the first time, Illyra felt the full power of her decision. THANOS placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent promise that whatever happened next, they would face it together. The throne room was no longer just a room. It was the battlefield for Illyra's future. And it was clear the war for the crown had just begun. The throne room had become a battlefield of wills. The once grand chamber now felt like a cage, the walls pressing in with the weight of history and power. Illyra stood at the center, every fiber of her being brimming with resolve. Her heart beat steady and strong as she faced her father, the man who had ruled for so long, and the council members who had once been the pillars of his reign. THANOS stood beside her, a silent sentinel, his presence unyielding. His gaze swept over the room with the kind of calm that only years of battle could give. He didn't need to speak to command attention. The very air seemed to bend around him, thick with the promise of violence if necessary. But today it was not violence that Illyra sought. It was something far more dangerous, the truth. Her father's face was a mask of fury, his eyes burning with a cold anger that she had seen too many times before. But this time, it wasn't fear that gripped her. It was freedom. And freedom, she realized, was far more terrifying than the chains he had tried to bind her with. "You truly believe you can overthrow everything I've built?" Her father's voice was low, laced with contempt, his fingers gripping the arms of the throne as if holding on to the last vestiges of his power. "You think a monster like him," he jerked his head toward THANOS, "can't help you. He'll destroy you, just as he has destroyed everyone else." Illyra's gaze never wavered. She stepped forward, her voice steady, strong. "You destroyed everything, Father. You twisted this kingdom with lies and fear, and I refuse to let it continue." The council members seated in their high chairs exchanged glances, some of them unsure, others with faces etched in fear. Their power had always been derived from the throne, from her father's rule. And now, with Illyra standing firm, they could see it slipping away. THANOS took a step forward, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the floor. His eyes locked onto the council members, his expression unreadable. "Your time is over," he said, his voice a low growl that seemed to echo in the silence. "Your reign ends today." One of the council members, the oldest among them, stood with trembling hands. "You cannot possibly think we will yield to this madness. This kingdom is not yours to claim." THANOS' lips curled into the slightest of smirks. "I don't need your kingdom. I'm here because she is mine to protect, and no one will stand in her way." Illyra felt a surge of strength at his words. He wasn't just a protector, he was a force that had chosen her. That had made her a part of his world, and in turn, had given her the courage to fight for the future she wanted. Her father's face twisted in rage. "You think I'll let you walk away with my throne? With my legacy?" Illyra stepped toward him, each step more confident than the last. Your legacy was built on lies, and I'll make sure it crumbles. I won't be your puppet any longer. A sharp gasp rippled through the room as the weight of her words settled in. The council members shifted uncomfortably, their faces a mix of fear and realization. The foundations of their power were crumbling, and they knew it. Her father's voice shook, his control slipping as he stood up from the throne. You've made a mistake, Illyra, a terrible mistake. No, Illyra said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The mistake was thinking I would never challenge you. The mistake was thinking you could control me. Thanos took a step closer to her, his hand brushing against hers in silent solidarity. The room seemed to shrink, the air crackling with the tension of the moment. Her father's power, his influence, had always been rooted in fear, but Illyra had never been afraid. Not anymore. Her father's gaze shifted, his eyes narrowing as he faced the inevitable. The walls were closing in on him, and he could no longer deny it. He had lost. The people had lost faith in him. The council had turned against him. And most importantly, Illyra had chosen to stand with someone who was far beyond his reach. With a final furious glare, her father turned away from her, walking out of the throne room in defeat. The room was silent, the air heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. Illyra stood tall, her chest rising and falling with the adrenaline of the moment. She had done it. She had broken free. Thanos turned to her, his expression softening just slightly. It's over. For the first time since she had entered this room, Illyra smiled. No, it's just beginning. She had taken back what was hers. And now, with Thanos by her side, she was ready to rebuild, ready to forge her own path, not bound by the expectations of the past, but by the power she had taken for herself.